The old Blackwood house squats on the edge of town like a forgotten tomb, its windows like vacant eyes staring out at nothing. The locals, they have their stories. Whispers passed down over generations, each one adding a new layer of dread to the property's history. They talk about the Miller family, who vanished without a trace back in the 70s, their half-eaten dinner left rotting on the table. They talk about a group of teenagers in the 90s who went in on a dare and were never seen again. Their car found abandoned on the roadside, doors hanging open as if they'd fled in a blind panic. But of all the tales, the one that clings to the house like a shroud is the legend of the lady below. Jake, ever the skeptic, saw it all as a challenge, a local ghost story to be debunked. He'd spent weeks digging through old town records and obscure online forums, piecing together the fragmented ritual he believed was the key to the legend. Tyler, on the other hand, felt a primal knot of fear tightening in his stomach with every mention of the house. He'd heard the warnings his whole life, the stern admonitions from his grandparents to never ever set foot on that cursed land. But Jake's persistence, his relentless goading, wore him down. "It's just a story, man," Jake had said, clapping him on the back with a confident grin. "We'll go in, light some candles, say some spooky words and prove everyone wrong. Think of the video we could make." And so, under the sliver of a bone-white moon, the two friends pushed open the groaning front door and stepped into the suffocating darkness of the Blackwood house, their footsteps echoing like a countdown in the oppressive silence. They made their way through the decaying labyrinth of the ground floor, their flashlight beams cutting through curtains of cobwebs and dancing over peeling wallpaper that looked like sun-scorched skin. The air was thick and stale, heavy with the smell of damp earth and something else, something metallic and vaguely sweet, like old blood. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle from the darkened corners, sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline through Tyler. He couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of unseen eyes following their every move from the shadows. Jake, however, was in his element, documenting everything on his phone, narrating their investigation with a theatrical flair. "And here we have the living room," he'd whisper, "where old man Miller supposedly sat in his rocking chair for 3 days straight, staring at a blank wall before he disappeared." They finally reached the main staircase, a skeletal structure that groaned in protest under their weight. The climb to the second floor felt like an ascent into another realm, the temperature dropping with each step until their breath plumed in the air. The bathroom was at the end of the hall, its door slightly ajar, a sliver of pale moonlight beckoning them from within. Inside, the room was a portrait of decay. The mirror was a spiderweb of cracks, the porcelain sink stained a rusty brown, and in the center of it all, a clawfoot tub sat like an open casket. This was the place, the heart of the legend. Moonlight, thin and milky, filtered through the grimy window pane, illuminating dust motes dancing in the frigid air. "All right," Jake whispered, his voice losing some of its earlier bravado. "This is it. You ready?" Tyler could only nod, his hands trembling so violently he could barely hold the pack of candles Jake thrust at him. Following Jake's hushed instructions, Tyler knelt by the tub. He turned the tarnished brass taps, and a trickle of dark, rust-colored water began to fill the basin, the sound unnervingly loud in the dead quiet of the house. The water was unnaturally cold, chilling the air around it until it felt like a pocket of deep winter had settled in the small room. Jake stood by the door, phone raised, its small red light the only warm color in the sterile moonlit space. "Okay, now the words," Jake prompted, his voice a low murmur. "Just like we practiced, do the first 2 stanzas." Tyler took a shaky breath, the icy air stinging his lungs. He lit the first of the 2 candles, its small flame casting long, distorted shadows that writhed on the walls like living things. He stared at his own wavering reflection in the dark water, and with a voice that was little more than a croak, he began the incantation. The words felt alien on his tongue, ancient and heavy with a power he couldn't comprehend. Lady below who drowned in these waters, lady below whose sorrow never falters. He paused, his heart hammering against his ribs. The silence that followed was absolute, deeper than before. The usual sounds of an old house, the settling of wood, the whisper of wind, had ceased completely, as if the world outside had vanished. "Keep going," Jake urged, his voice tight. Tyler squeezed his eyes shut and continued, his voice gaining a strange, rhythmic cadence, as if the words themselves were pulling him along. "Lady below who strangled her own daughter, lady below who feeds on the slaughter." As the last word left his lips, he plunged the first lit candle into the water. It extinguished with a sharp hiss, and a wave of profound, bone-deep cold slammed into them. It wasn't just a drop in temperature, it was an active, predatory cold that seeped into their clothes and clung to their skin. The flame on the remaining candle flickered wildly, and in the strobing light, Tyler saw it. In the darkest corner of the room, behind him, a shape was beginning to coalesce. It was a smudge at first, a patch of darkness that was somehow blacker than the surrounding shadows. Then it began to stretch and elongate, pulling itself into a vaguely human form. A pale, distorted face with hollow sockets for eyes slowly resolved from the gloom, and then came the hand. Long, skeletal, with whitish fingers that looked like bleached bone. It emerged from the shadows and reached slowly, deliberately, toward the tub, its nails dragging silently across the surface of the dark water, leaving no ripples in its wake. A strangled noise, half gasp, half scream, caught in Tyler's throat. He was paralyzed, his eyes locked on the horrifying apparition materializing before him. A muffled, gurgling scream finally tore from Tyler's lungs, a sound of pure, unadulterated terror that echoed horribly through the decaying hallway. Downstairs, Jake had been nervously pacing, the oppressive silence of the house finally getting to him. The scream shattered the stillness and sent a spike of pure ice through his veins. That wasn't a prank. That was real. "Tyler!" he yelled, his voice cracking. He scrambled for the stairs, his pulse hammering a frantic rhythm against his eardrums. He took the creaking, groaning steps 2 at a time, his own panicked breaths loud in the suffocating quiet. The bathroom door was now shut tight. He slammed his shoulder against it once, twice, the old wood groaning in protest. On the third try, the lock splintered and the door flew inward with a sickening crack. Jake stumbled into the room, his phone's flashlight beam cutting a frantic path through the darkness, and the sight that met him would be burned into his memory for the rest of his short life. He broke down the door and was met with a scene from his worst nightmares. The room was plunged into an almost absolute darkness, the moonlight blotted out by something he couldn't see. His flashlight beam sliced through the gloom, landing on the tub. Tyler was floating face up in the dark, rust-colored water. His body was limp, but his eyes were wide open, staring up at the ceiling with an expression of such profound, unspeakable terror that it seemed to freeze his very features. They were glassy, reflecting the frantic beam of Jake's light and the horrifying emptiness of the room. As Jake stared in frozen horror, the second candle, which had been sitting on the edge of the tub, suddenly went out with a soft, final hiss, plunging the room into total blackness. The silence that followed was deafening, a physical pressure in Jake's ears. It lasted only a few seconds, but it stretched into an eternity. Then, a new sound broke the stillness. A soft, rhythmic dripping. Drip, drip, drip. It wasn't coming from the faucet. It sounded like it was right beside him. He held his breath, straining to hear, every nerve in his body screaming. And then, an icy, ethereal whisper slithered directly into his ear, so close he could feel the chilling absence of breath that accompanied it. "You're next." The legend of the lady below was real. Jake's blood ran cold as he realized his fatal error. The ritual wasn't a myth to be debunked, it was a summons. And now, the lady below, woken from her slumber, had claimed a new soul to torment in the dark waters of the Blackwood house, and she was hungry for another.